Good evening from the National Weather Service office in Lake Charles. I'm meteorologist Donald Jones, and welcome to this edition of Donald After Dark. So everyone gather around the campfire, children, and I've got a story to tell you about newly upgraded Hurricane Francine. Yes, Francine is now a hurricane with maximum sustained winds near 75 miles per hour. That actually happened at the intermediate advisory at 7 p.m. this evening. So it's been a hurricane for a little over 3.5 hours now. And it hasn't intensified any further since then. It reached minimal hurricane strength, and it's kind of stayed that way. Some additional intensification is going to be possible for about another 12 hours or so before it begins to encounter a much more hostile environment as it approaches the coastline going into tomorrow. So there is the possibility that we could see some continued increase in the maximum wind speed, but only till about mid to late morning tomorrow before those hostile conditions kind of take over, and that'll at least limit development as the storm is making landfall, which is still expected to occur sometime tomorrow afternoon or perhaps early tomorrow evening. We're going to talk about all of that. I also have the parish by parish breakdown updates and all the other expected impacts across the region as it relates to Francine. So grab your snackies. Again, join me around the campfire and we'll talk about it all. As always, this is a live interactive briefing. So if you have any questions as we go through our briefing, feel free to post them in our comment section and we'll answer them just as soon as we wrap up our briefing. I've been up all day, so I am a little loopy, so bear with me as we go through it. Again, Francine has maximum sustained winds near 75 miles per hour, making it a Category 1 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. It's not out of the realm of possibility. We could see another 10, perhaps 15 mile per hour increase in wind speed. I think it's not particularly likely that we're going to see a Category 2 at this point, although it's not Category 1 hurricane at landfall, which again is expected to occur tomorrow afternoon. Still near Morgan City. The forecast track hasn't really shifted much since this afternoon. We had been seeing that gradual shift to the east, but it's kind of stabilized now right where it is, with landfall still expected right around Morgan City. The interesting thing about this storm, which I'm going to show you the satellite here in just a second, is and that the Hurricane Center pointed out, it's a pretty asymmetrical storm. The eye is actually somewhat elongated. It's not a completely circular eye. It's actually more of an oval shape. And the vast majority of the wind and the thunderstorms is on the eastern side, which is typical. You normally see the strongest winds and rain on the eastern side of the storm, but there's not really a whole heck of a lot on the western side of it at this point. And that's good for most of our region, Southeast Texas, Southwest Louisiana. That means fewer impacts across our area. And in fact, the forecast rainfall totals have come down fairly significantly because there's really not a whole lot of rain on the west side of it. And there's not a whole lot of wind either, at least not right now. So therefore, we have actually dropped the tropical storm warnings for coastal parts of Jefferson County that were still in effect. So Jefferson County, all of Southeast Texas, now under no tropical threat at all to really speak of. In fact, a vast majority of Jefferson County, of Southeast Texas, isn't even going to see much in the way of rainfall from this storm. The previous hurricane warnings that were in effect for Cameron Parish have now been downgraded to tropical storm warnings, as well as we're no longer expecting those hurricane force winds across even coastal parts of Cameron Parish at this time. Taking a look at the infrared satellite imagery this evening. The center of circulation it's really difficult to see in this graphic here. It just looks like a kind of a mess of white, but it is buried in there. And the vast majority of the activity is along and east of the center of circulation, with not a whole lot. You can kind of see it's almost kind of a line on the west-hand side. It's a very sharp gradient there. That's an indication of that there's not a whole lot of wind nor rain on the western side of the storm. And we expect that kind of elongated, asymmetrical look to generally continue all the way up until landfall tomorrow afternoon. This is the 10 p.m. advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Again, maximum sustained winds presently near 75 miles per hour. Movement is to the northeast at about 10 miles per hour, so that's remained pretty steady state as we've gone through the evening. And we are continuing to see this gradual acceleration, I think, as we go through the next 12-ish hours or thereabout, all the way up to landfall. Still looking at probably 12 to 15 mile per hour of forward motion as the storm makes landfall here tomorrow afternoon. You can see that there actually is, this is a little bit more the tropical storm force winds are probably a little bit more aligned in this graphic, the area, the circle highlighted in orange, than is actually the case right now. You can see the much smaller dark orange kind of towards the center. That is the extent of the hurricane force wind field. So it really, the hurricane force winds only extend about 10-ish miles from the center of circulation right now. If it gets a little stronger, those hurricane force winds may expand outwards a little bit. But at least for right now, the threat of hurricane force winds is going to be confined to the very close to the center of circulation, only in and around the Vermilion Bay area as it makes landfall. As I mentioned, tropical storm warnings have been discontinued for lower Jefferson County. So there are no areas in southeast Texas other than Sabine Lake that are under any kind of tropical warnings at this point. There is still a tropical storm warning for Sabine Lake. And the hurricane warning that had previously been in effect for Cameron Parish has been downgraded to a tropical storm warning now because we're not expecting hurricane force conditions in Cameron Parish. So with that in mind, we do still have hurricane warnings in effect for Vermilion, Lafayette, Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary parishes, essentially all of the parishes that surround Vermilion Bay. And then we do have tropical storm warnings in effect for Calcasieu, Jeff Davis, Allen, Acadia, Evangeline, St. Landry, and Avoyelles. And now, more recently, Cameron Parish as well. Welcome to the Tropical Storm Club. As far as the time of arrival, again, we are still expecting those tropical storm force winds to begin. Oh, go back. Click the wrong button here. Now I'm going forward. We are still expecting those tropical storm force winds to begin between about 10 a.m. and noon. That's a couple of hours later than we were previously advertising, but still not a huge difference in time frame. We're talking a couple of hours here. The bottom line is tomorrow morning, we'll see the onset of those tropical storm force winds primarily across south central Louisiana, but perhaps across coastal portions of Cameron Parish as well, and then gradually working their way inland through the early afternoon. Landfall of the eye itself, elongated or not, is going to occur, it looks like, sometime during the late afternoon to early evening. So that's when the hurricane force winds and the strongest overall winds will move into portions of in and around the Vermilion Bay area. Right around Morgan City is the official landfall point. So hurricane force winds in Morgan City expected probably between about 4 and 7 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. This is our forecast maximum wind gust, and this hasn't changed a whole lot from our earlier advisory. We're still looking at, obviously, the highest overall winds in and around Vermilion Bay, with the highest right around Morgan City. That's the landfall point. Still calling for 90-mile-an-hour gusts as that eye makes landfall. The wind gusts across southeast Texas have backed off a little bit, as have the wind gusts across southwest Louisiana. You can still see gusting to low-end tropical storm force across Calcasieu, Jeff Davis, Acadia, Allen, Evangeline, up towards Avoyelles, St. Landry. So that's why we still have these tropical storm warnings in effect for these areas, for these wind gusts of 40 miles per hour or higher. We're not expecting sustained tropical storm force winds, though, in these areas. These are mainly going to come in the form of gusts within the rain bands as they move through. Flood watches are still in effect for a large majority of southwest and south central Louisiana, as well as all of southeast Louisiana as well. The exceptions being Vernon Parish and Beauregard Parish, where we're not expecting a whole lot in the way of rainfall accumulations in those areas. And even parts of the Calcasieu Parish and Cameron Parish are going to struggle to see huge rainfall totals. Maybe extreme eastern Cameron Parish, which is mostly the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge, might see some higher rainfall totals. But the rainfall totals have really come down from even earlier this afternoon. We'll take a look at that here in just a second, actually right now. You can see the very sharp rainfall gradient on the west side of where the center of circulation is expected to make landfall. So right in and around Vermilion Bay, we're looking at 8 to 12 inches of overall rainfall. Just to the west of that, though, we drop very quickly down to roughly 4 to 6 by the time we get to, say, Lafayette. And by the time we get to Lake Charles, we're looking at anywhere between only 1 to 2 inches, maybe even less than that. So that's a very sharp gradient on the west side from a precipitation perspective. And that's due to the fact that the storm is essentially, most of the activity is displaced to the right-hand side. Much larger swath of precipitation totals on the right-hand side going towards the Baton Rouge area, over towards New Orleans, the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain, where you're looking at 6 to 8 inches in and around the Baton Rouge area, 4 to 6 inches as you get into New Orleans and on the North Shore Lake Pontchartrain. And those values go all the way up into southern and central and northern Mississippi as that center of circulation degenerates into a remnant low and just turns into a massive rain as it moves off to the north. We do still have some storm surge hazards in effect. The storm surge warning that was in effect for western Cameron has been downgraded to a coastal flood advisory, again, because we're not expecting nearly as strong of winds across coastal portions of Cameron Parish. The storm surge warning that remains in effect for eastern Cameron Parish is primarily, again, the area that's in and around or near the Rockefeller Wildlife Refuge. Not a whole lot of population out that way. And really, we're talking about kind of the very close to the Cameron-Vermilion Parish line, where those higher storm surge values are going to wind up setting up much closer to that center of circulation. We do still have those storm surge warnings in effect for Cameron, Vermilion, Iberia, and St. Mary parishes. Storm surge warning means that we're expecting greater than 3 feet of storm surge. And here are the latest storm surge peak values. We're looking at essentially 5 to 10 feet continuing from the Vermilion Cameron Parish line east across Vermilion Bay and all the way east to Port Fourchon. Back to the west between the Vermilion Parish line and Cameron proper, we're looking at roughly 3 to 5 feet of surge. West of Cameron, only 1 to 3 feet, and that's the reason for the drop from the storm surge warning to the coastal flood advisory. Points further east from Port Fourchon to the mouth of the Mississippi, 4 to 7 feet, and from the mouth of the Mississippi River to the Mississippi-Alabama border, looking at between 3 and 5 feet, and that does include Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas. So if you're watching us from over that way, we are expecting at least some storm surge to get in and around the lake. I know both the north and south shores of Lake Pontchartrain are very susceptible to storm surge. So bear that in mind. I can't get into too much detail with that, but the National Weather Service office in Slidell, which covers that area, does have much more detail. So if you are watching from that area and interested in those details, you can check out their social media pages as well. I know they are also doing Facebook Live broadcast amongst other graphical depictions. So if you're watching from anywhere in Southeast Louisiana, they will have much more detailed information than I will have for you. There is still a tornado risk, generally extending from Lafayette east to New Iberia down towards Morgan City and parts of Southeast, or pretty much all of Southeast Louisiana, in an overall slight risk. That's a category 2 out of 5 on the Storm Prediction Center severe weather scale, which translates roughly to about a 5 to 10% chance of seeing a tornado essentially within anywhere within that area highlighted in yellow, which is majority of Southeast Louisiana, basically from Morgan City up towards Baton Rouge. That does include New Orleans and the North Shore as well. As far as the rest of us across Southeast Texas, Southwest Louisiana, you can see essentially west of Lafayette, there is virtually no tornado threat to speak of. So we're not really concerned about tornado risk, except for roughly from Lafayette down towards New Iberia, Morgan City, in and around the Vermilion Bay area. So that's what we have this evening for you from the National Weather Service. We are going to do our parish by parish breakdown here in just a moment. We are going to do another one of these briefings tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. That's probably going to be the last briefing before landfall, or at least if we do one in the afternoon, it'll be very close to landfall. But we will have another one tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. if you're not interested in the parish by parish breakdown, or if you don't have any questions. We're going to do the parish by parish next, and then we will answer any questions. I'm going to come up here and press a little button on my camera here because there's a thing on it that's annoying me. Used to be this late at night, you start to get annoyed by small things. All right, we're going to go ahead and do our parish by parish breakdown now, and then we will answer any questions that you have. Let's go ahead and jump right into that. So we're going to start in and around Vermilion Bay because that is where the higher overall threat is going to be. So for Vermilion Parish, we're looking at 50 to 60 mile an hour winds gusting to 75, 5 to 10 feet of storm surge, 8 to 10 inches of rainfall with up to 16 inches possible, a marginal risk of tornadoes, roughly 2 to 4%. And we are expecting some power outages across Vermilion Parish, especially coastal portions of Vermilion Parish with those strong tropical storm to hurricane force winds. For Lafayette, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50, 4 to 6 inches of rainfall with up to 12 inches possible. We are looking at a marginal risk of tornadoes, roughly about a 2 to 4% chance. And we are expecting at least a few power outages across Lafayette, probably not as much as we're going to see closer to Vermilion Bay, but it wouldn't surprise me if we do have a few power outages across Lafayette Parish. For Iberia, 60 to 70 mile an hour winds gusting to 80, 5 to 10 feet of storm surge, 8 to 10 inches of rainfall with up to 16 inches possible. We are looking at a marginal risk of tornadoes, a 2 to 4% chance, and we are expecting at least some scattered power outages across Iberia Parish due to those near hurricane to hurricane force winds. St. Martin, 60 to 70 mile per hour winds gusting to 80, storm surge 5 to 10 feet, rainfall 8 to 10 inches with up to 16 inches possible, a marginal risk of tornadoes, roughly about a 2 to 4% chance, and we are expecting some power outages across St. Martin Parish with those kind of winds. For St. Mary, 70 to 80 mile per hour winds, gusting to 90. You are in the crosshairs. You are essentially the ground zero, the eye of the storm, if you will. That's where the strongest winds are going to be as the eye of the storm comes ashore. Storm surge 5 to 10 feet, rainfall 8 to 10 inches with up to 16 inches possible. We are looking at a slight risk of tornadoes, roughly about a 5 to 9% chance, and we are expecting scattered to perhaps widespread power outages with the strongest winds as the storm comes ashore. I would imagine that most people in St. Mary Parish are probably going to lose power at some point or another as the storm makes landfall and moves inland. For Evangeline Parish, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50. Rainfall totals 2 to 3 inches with up to 6 inches possible. We don't have a tornado threat to speak of for Evangeline Parish. We could possibly see some street flooding if we get that rainfall falling in a fairly short period of time, and perhaps a few isolated areas of power outages, but I'm not expecting a whole bunch across Evangeline Parish. For Avoyelles, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50, 2 to 3 inches of rainfall with up to 6 inches possible. Those winds will be strong enough to perhaps knock out a few power to a few homes, but not expecting widespread power outages. And if we do get that rainfall falling fairly quickly, we could see some minor street flooding across parts of Avoyelles. For St. Landry, 40 to 50 mile per hour winds gusting to 60, 3 to 4 inches with up to 8 inches of rainfall possible. We are looking at the possibility of a few power outages across St. Landry. And again, depending on how fast that rain falls, we could be looking at some minor street flooding. For Cameron, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50. Storm surge is going to be in the 2 to 5 foot range, 2 feet on the western side and 5 feet closer to Vermilion Parish. Rainfall 2 to 6 inches with up to 12 inches possible. We are not expecting much in the way of a tornado threat. We are expecting the possibility of some power outages with those gusts to 50 miles per hour. Not everybody, but there will be some. And then we are going to be looking at periods of heavy rainfall that could lead to some street flooding across Cameron Parish, although that's really hard to do with how marshy it is and how quickly that water runs off. For Calcasieu Parish, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50. Rainfall only 1/2 to 1 inch now being forecasted for Calcasieu Parish. So this is a sharp come down from where we were even just this morning. Not expecting much in the way of tornado threat. We could see a few power outages if we get some of those 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts, but that's going to be about the limit of impacts across Calcasieu Parish, with the rainfall not expecting to amount to a whole lot. For Beauregard Parish, 25 to 35 mile per hour winds gusting to 45. Kind of the same thing with Beauregard, not expecting a lot in terms of rainfall, a 1/2 inch up to 1 inch. Possibly a few power outages if we get some stronger wind gusts, but that's going to be about it for Beauregard. For Vernon, 15 to 25 mile per hour winds gusting to 30. 1/2 inch to 1 inch of rainfall. Really not, I have the periods of heavy rainfall leading to street flooding, but that's really, with a 1/2 inch to 1 inch, that's not really much of a concern. I need to take that off. So really no threats to speak of across Vernon Parish. For Jeff Davis Parish, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50, 2 to 3 inches of rainfall with up to 6 inches possible. No tornado threat to speak of. Those wind gusts will have the potential to knock out a few power lines or some power to homes, but not expecting that to be too widespread. We could see some minor flooding across Jeff Davis Parish if we see some of that rainfall pile up fairly quickly. But even that's kind of a low confidence forecast. That sharp delineation of where that rainfall gradient is going to be may mean that this might be an overestimation of rainfall totals. Jeff Davis may see a fair bit less than what's actually being indicated here. For Allen Parish, 20 to 30 mile per hour winds gusting to 40, 1 to 1.5 inches of rainfall with up to 3 inches possible. No tornado threat to speak of. Maybe a couple of power outages with those gusts to 40. That's probably a little unlikely, other than maybe just a few, maybe a neighborhood or so. For Rapides Parish, 15 to 25 mile per hour winds gusting to 35. a half to 1 inch of rainfall. No really impacts expected. No significant impacts anyway for Rapides Parish. It's going to be a breezy day. It's going to be a cloudy day. Otherwise, that's the only way you're really going to know there's much of a tropical activity at all out there. For Acadia Parish, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50. Rainfall of 3 to 4 inches with up to 8 inches possible. Those wind gusts to 50 will have the potential to knock out a few power lines that could lead to some power outages, but we're not expecting those to be widespread. They're going to be very isolated in nature. And those periods of heavy rainfall, should they pile up in a fairly short period of time, could lead to some street flooding across Acadia. For Newton County in southeast Texas, 15 to 20 mile an hour winds gusting to 30, a quarter inch to a half inch of rainfall. Just another day in September. Again, cloudy, relatively cool, so that's actually a benefit of having a tropical system nearby, but no impacts to speak of. Jefferson County, 30 to 40 mile per hour winds gusting to 50 along the immediate coastline. This is not going to get very far inland. This would be right along the immediate coast, probably not getting as far north as Beaumont. Maybe in the vicinity of Port Arthur, you might see some 30 to 40 mile an hour gusts, but this is mainly going to be right along the immediate coastline. Storm surge 2 to 4 feet. Rainfall is going to be between about a half inch to an inch. So that's probably not going to be enough to cause significant flooding across Jefferson County. Those wind gusts will have the potential to knock out some power along the immediate coastline. But again, I don't expect those winds to get too far inland. So I don't expect power outages to be too much of a concern in, say, the Beaumont area. For Orange County, 20 to 30 mile per hour winds gusting to 40. Storm surge 2 to 4 feet around Sabine Lake. Rainfall totals between about a quarter and a half inch. That's not going to be enough to cause any kind of significant flooding threat, at least not at this time. The storm surge causing minor coastal flooding will be the limit of the flooding threat across Orange County, and really the only appreciable impact that we're going to see. For Hardin County, 15 to 20 mile per hour winds gusting to 30. A quarter to a half inch of rainfall. That's not expected to be enough to cause any significant impacts across Hardin County. For Tyler County, 15 to 20 mile per hour winds gusting to 30, a tenth of an inch to a quarter of an inch. It very well may not even rain in Tyler County, so we're not expecting any significant impacts across Tyler. Finally, for Jasper County, 15 to 20 mile per hour winds gusting to 30, a tenth of an inch to a quarter of an inch. Again, parts of Jasper County may not even see any rain at all. No tornado threat, and therefore no real significant hazard of any kind expected across Jasper County as it relates to Hurricane Francine. So that's what we have here this evening. As far as the parish by parish breakdowns, I will post these to our social media accounts just as soon as we wrap up our live briefing here. So you will have the opportunity to view them if you've missed them and share them as liberally as you see fit. Next up is going to be our question and answer session, everybody's favorite part. So let's go ahead and jump into that. I'm going to back up here a little bit to the latest advisory, and I will now take your questions. Put them on in. I'm going to back up in the comment section here, and I'll start with those. But if you have one, go ahead and throw it in there, and I will be happy to answer it for you. Edwina says, Jim Cantori is in Morgan City. That's wonderful. Well, we kind of figured that because that's where the eye of the storm's going. Somebody go out there and tell him hi for me. Front desk says, looks like Pensacola might actually get some severe weather tomorrow. We do have tropical storm warnings up as far east as the Alabama state line. So, yeah, some of those outer rain bands probably will get into parts of the Florida panhandle. So it's definitely possible you could see at least some of the outer rain bands of this. Mandy says, every weather person is predicting the storm different. It's always in a different spot, and they are all saying different things about it. The forecast does change. I'll give you that much, and our forecast has changed. The initial forecast was for a landfall right along the Texas-Louisiana state line, and that has shifted east. Our forecast changes based on the latest science and the latest computer models, which is based on science. So that's a normal part of the forecast process. We don't ever pretend to be 100% right 5, 6, 7 days in advance. That's why we have the cone of uncertainty. That's why we speak in terms of uncertainty. But when we give these ranges, or when I flat out say I'm not sure at a certain point, that's a normal part of the forecast process. As far as other people making other forecasts, everyone's at liberty to make their own forecasts as they see fit. Ours is based on the National Hurricane Center, which is a branch of the National Weather Service. So we rely on them for their forecast expertise, as does most of the meteorological community. Everyone's out there is entitled to, we see a lot of these individual model runs, which I constantly advocate for you to ignore, because they're all the time very, very wrong in most cases. So after that cheery conversation, Shadow Gaming Review says, not a question, but I just want to say the Gulf is doing a little trolling of Houston right now. How do you figure? Just like scaring it after the Beryl situation by putting another one just off the coast there? Patricia asked, do you think Franklin may lose power or have high water? I have to make a trip there Thursday. Yeah, I think Franklin probably, they're going to be close enough that there probably will be some power outages. Will the power outages still be ongoing on Thursday? I can't say for sure, but I think you will see some power outages in that area. Alex Jones says the Weather Channel has it at 85 miles per hour. Okay, that's nice. It's not. We have Hurricane Hunter aircraft in the plane right now, measuring it in near real time. So if that's true, they're wrong. I'm not 100% sure that that's what they're saying, but if so, that it is what it is. Before I say that, let me double check and make sure the Hurricane Center hasn't put an update out real quick, and I have to eat crow for saying that. Let's see. Oh, yep. See, that's why I got to shut up because they did put out another update here just a few minutes ago. So yes, winds are near 85 miles per hour. I apologize to you, Alex. Again, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft are out there analyzing and dropping, instruments into the storm as we speak. So what happens is that data comes back in near real time to the Hurricane Center, and they can update it. So yes, scratch out. Let me get my little crayon here. This is not going to last, but I'll just do it for symbolic sake. We'll scratch it out right there. We'll put 85 miles per hour, and we thank Alex for his service. Kimberly asked, did it make a nudge to the west since this morning? Sorry, I missed the live. The landfall location right now is right near Morgan City. It's actually been pushing to the east through most of the day. The forecast track has. With this most recent update, it's been pretty steady, so that hasn't changed a whole lot. But we're still looking for a landfall point right near Morgan City tomorrow afternoon into early tomorrow evening. April says, do you think that Lafayette Parish will remain under the hurricane warning? There was actually some discussion about whether or not to take Lafayette Parish out of the hurricane warning earlier this afternoon. We decided to go ahead and keep them in for the time being. It is possible that they could be removed from the warning tomorrow morning, but at least at this point, Lafayette Parish is still in a hurricane warning. Chandra says that was a very diplomatic response. Very well done, Donald. I work for the government, so I'm a master of diplomatic relations. Robin asked about the chances of it shifting more east. Here's the thing about that, and the thing to keep in mind. Let me go ahead and make this full screen so you can see our cone of uncertainty right now. Even at this stage, we're still looking at an average error from the National Hurricane Center of about 30 miles. So what that means is essentially there's a reasonable likelihood that the forecast track could shift either west or east by about 30 miles. Between now and the storm actually making landfall. That's a 5-year historical error average. And that's how the cone of uncertainty is actually made. That's how it's based. It's not dynamic. It doesn't change for each individual storm. It's actually a static historical error of the tracks of the National Hurricane Center. So on average, in the last 5 years, the Hurricane Center has been off by 30 miles this far out, roughly about 24 hours from landfall. So to answer your question directly, can it shift more east? Yes, probably, anywhere from about 30 miles or so, either east or 30 miles back to the west, statistically speaking. Angel asks, is Morgan City getting the eye? The current forecast track does have Morgan City, or the eye, tracking right over Morgan City tomorrow afternoon into early tomorrow evening. Nick says, my husband is hunkering down in Belle Chase. He says it has never flooded there. Is that on the east side of landfall? Yes, Belle Chase is going to be on the east side of the landfall point. Michelle asked, do you think anything will happen in eastern Tennessee? All you're going to have in eastern Tennessee by the time it gets up there is just going to be what we call a remnant low. It's not actually going to be a tropical system at that point anymore. So what you're going to see is just a lot of rain. It may be a little bit breezy, but just because you have a low pressure in the vicinity. But other than that, it's just going to be rain. Brady asks, is there a likelihood of the warnings being canceled for Allen, Avoyelles, and Evangeline parishes? I don't think they're going to be canceled, at least not at this point, because we're still looking at gusts to those low-end tropical storm force. So gusts of around 40 miles per hour or thereabouts. Let me go ahead and now I got to get rid of this first. I got to go back. So here is a look at the current forecast maximum wind gusts, and you can see we're still forecasting tropical storm force wind gusts across pretty much all of those parishes, Allen, Avoyelles, and Evangeline. So I think as long as we're still seeing that in our forecast, which is based primarily on computer models, then we're going to maintain that tropical storm warning. If we continue to see the storm erode on the west side and it doesn't look like there's very strong winds, then it may be canceled. But that probably wouldn't happen until shortly before landfall. Betty asked, are we in the clear in Lafayette? Well, we're still looking at tropical storm force winds expected in Lafayette, kind of like you can see on the graphic there that I just pulled up. Maximum wind gusts in Lafayette are forecasted to be right around 50 miles per hour. So I wouldn't necessarily call that in the clear. You're going to be looking at tropical storm force winds. Now, you're not looking at the eye of the storm moving right over the top of you, but you are going to be looking at impacts. Stephanie asks, what app should someone use who is in Lafayette? I'm in Texas, and my daughter just moved there, first time ever having to experience this. In general, we're a government agency. We're not allowed to endorse any specific apps, but your local TV media outlets usually do a pretty good job with their weather apps. So I would suggest theirs as kind of a starting point if you're not very familiar with weather. That'll get you about 90% of what you need to know. Brian asked, in mileage, what's the average amount of distance with regards to landfall predictions within 24 hours? I guess, are you talking about that error again? It's 30 miles, like we just talked about. So the average error over the last 5 years of the National Hurricane Center at 24 hours is 30 miles. And that is the diameter of the cone of uncertainty at landfall right now. It's roughly 30 miles either direction. Courtney asks, is there any update on Lake Charles? Yeah, Lake Charles is not going to see a whole lot. Again, the parish by parish that we just did, we've got about a ½ inch to an inch of rainfall. The graphic you just saw behind me with the maximum sustained winds, we are still looking at the possibility of maybe some tropical storm force winds to about 40 miles per hour, but that's going to be about it. Dennis asks, when would you recommend staying off the roads in Lafayette tomorrow morning? That's going to depend on how good you think you can drive in tropical storm force winds. Again, we're going to be looking at those tropical storm force winds beginning. Let me go ahead and pull that graphic back up here. The onset of the tropical storm force winds are going to be generally between about 10 a.m. and noon. For Lafayette, it's probably going to be closer to noon, maybe between about noon and 2 p.m. So if your goal is to stay off the roads with tropical storm force winds, you probably want to be off the roads by about noon. Some people can handle driving in tropical storm force winds. Some people can't. Mario says, as long as that H doesn't change to an M, we good. That's true. And fortunately, we are not forecasting that. M would mean a major hurricane, so that'd be a Category 3 or greater, and we are not forecasting that. Michaela says, every year I'm so thankful for Donald and so glad he is in our region. Bless this man. Donald, you are a gem. Thank you, Michaela. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of your wonderful comments. I really do. I don't always acknowledge them on here because we're trying to answer the questions about weather, but I do see them and I do appreciate them. Jasmine says, I work at Sabine Pass and the Cameron Refinery. Will the weather be bad? We're certainly going to be looking at some windy conditions right along the coast there. I'm not expecting a lot in the way of rainfall, but we'll be looking at probably some tropical storm force winds, 40-ish miles per hour. That's going to be your biggest impact, probably from late morning through the middle to late part of afternoon, maybe even early evening. Everything should be clearing out of here by tomorrow night. This is not something that's going to stick around and linger. Again, it's going to be accelerating as it approaches land and moves inland. So it's not something we're going to be dealing with for days on end. This is at most a one-day event. Yolanda asks, will it intensify to a Category 2 before landfall? It's possible. I'm not ruling it out. I don't think it's particularly likely. I think we'll probably be looking at a high-end Category 1. Right now we're at 75. It wouldn't surprise me if we see it jump up to 85, possibly 90. I think that's kind of the upper limit of it right now, though. Joshua asks, how does gusts compare to the actual sustained wind speeds if they're individual? The gusts are always going to be higher than the sustained winds. Your sustained winds are measured in either 1 or 3 minute intervals, and those are always going to be significantly lower. So there is a correlation there. It varies depending on whether you're talking about a tropical system versus a non-tropical system. For a non-tropical system, it's generally about 1 1/4 of what your gusts are, about 1 1/4 of what your sustained winds are. When you start getting into the upper ranges of a tropical system, those factors increase. So in this case, if you're looking at a 40 mile per hour gust, then you're probably looking at sustained winds in the 20 to 25 mile an hour range. If you're looking at, say, over towards Morgan City, where the storm is going to be making landfall, where we're talking about perhaps a 90 mile an hour gust, your sustained winds are probably going to be closer to the 60, 70 mile per hour range. That was a good question. Richard asks, how much of a tornado threat is there for tomorrow? There is a tornado threat essentially from Lafayette east. If you're west of Lafayette, then we're not expecting much in the way of a tornado threat. So there is our tornado threat graphic, essentially, and even from Lafayette down to Morgan City, or just west of Morgan City, the overall tornado threat is pretty low. Morgan City east, it's a little bit higher. So southeast Louisiana is looking at the higher overall tornado threat. If you're west of Lafayette, though, we are not expecting much of anything in terms of a tornado threat. Nick's kind of asking the same question. Are you expecting a lot of tornadoes in Belle Chase area? Belle Chase is going to be in the higher tornado threat area. I wouldn't say that we're expecting a lot necessarily, but you are in the higher risk area. Rob asked, is there any chance landfall could be near NOLA? At this point, I don't think so. Again, we were talking about that error, historically speaking, 30 miles one way or the other. So we're looking at a landfall point at Morgan City right now. So we could see a little bit of a shift west or east, but that would be a significant shift to have a landfall all the way in New Orleans. So no, we're not expecting the eye to make landfall in New Orleans at this point. Dakota asks, if the power goes out, what would your prediction be on the time frame it would come back? I have no earthly idea. There are plenty of things that I know in this world, and that is not one of them. You want to know why? Because it relies on people. Weather is easy compared to predicting people. There's so many variables involved with that. How many electricians are available, where they're staged, what kind of damage there is there a tree on top of it? Does it have to be removed? Do they have to put new, I don't even know what they call those, poles in the ground? That there are so many factors that go into that. I couldn't even begin to estimate. I don't even know how they estimate with their return to services. So yeah, I'll stick with forecasting the weather, and we'll leave the power to the power guys. Alicia says NOLA is not in his region. That's National Weather Service Slidell. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The area you see behind me on this graphic that's kind of highlighted, you see southeast Texas, kind of southwest Louisiana, east to about Morgan City. That's the area that our office covers explicitly. Now, I'm happy to talk broadly about areas outside of that, but I can't get too specific for two reasons. One, there's the whole not wanting to fish in somebody else's pond. That's other offices' responsibilities. And two, I really haven't been focusing too much on areas outside of our own. This is the area that we primarily focus on. So that's the area I've been paying close attention to. Now, there is a National Weather Service office in Slidell. They cover New Orleans, Baton Rouge, the North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain, parts of Mississippi. They can give you much more detailed information on what to expect in those areas. Same thing, there's a Weather Service office in Houston. They cover the Houston area. They're our neighbors to the west. So anything in and around the Houston area, west of Jefferson and Hardin counties, that is covered by the Houston office. North of Alexandria, that's covered by the Weather Service in Shreveport. I know that's kind of convoluted. It'd be much easier if I could just take care of it all. But that we have these sections that each individual office is responsible for, so that we can get very detailed like we are. We can talk about these individual locations more specifically than if we were just in one big national office that covered everybody. Sabrina is asking, what is the current pressure? Let's take a look at the current pressure, at least the pressure as of 7 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I should say. Where is it on here? It is on here, isn't it? Maybe they don't put that on here anymore. That's okay. I'll look it up the other way. Give me just a moment. Yes, I'm singing. It's really late. You don't want to listen to me sing anymore, so I better find what you want. The minimum central pressure is 980 millibars, at least as the of the 10 p.m. advisory. Amy asks, is the storm going to be a Category 4 or 5? No, we're not expecting that at this time. Strong Category 1, maybe low-end Category 2 is about all we're looking for right now. Sal says, show hurricane model winds? Question mark. No. No, I'm not in the habit of showing individual models or even groups of models on here because then I'd have to explain all of the intricacies of each model and what it actually means, and that would take us a really long time. So yeah, I'm not gonna get into the weeds with all that. Lori asks, do storm surges last long, like till the storm passes, or just when it first arrives? That's a good question. Storm surges tend to start as soon as you start getting the stronger winds ahead of a hurricane. So it can be well ahead of the storm actually making landfall. So we're probably already seeing a little bit of surge across parts of coastal Louisiana, even as early as right now. Now that surge is going to gradually continue to work up all the way through landfall. And then once the storm makes landfall, then the winds are going to shift behind it and actually start pushing that water back out of Vermilion Bay again. Because if you think about it, let me go ahead and now I'm doing it just like this. Okay, so ahead of the storm, we've got winds that are spinning counterclockwise around a storm, around a hurricane from this angle. So you've got winds that are out of the southeast, pushing water all into Vermilion Bay. Vermilion Bay, you know, it's a bay, so it has, you know, land around it. So that water has nowhere to go while it's in it. Now, once the storm gets past Vermilion Bay and it's, you know, up here, now the winds are spinning clockwise the other direction. So now it's going to be pushing water out of Vermilion Bay. So all the way up until the point of landfall, the storm surge is going to continue to increase. As it makes landfall, it's at a maximum. And then once it gets past, the winds switch around and you start seeing that water go out again. Bird asks, Donald, do you sleep at the station during a hurricane? I have in the past. Not for this one, thankfully, but I have in the past, yes. The Reading Rainbow. Are there any disturbances happening in the Gulf right now that you guys are watching? Francine. There are no other disturbances in the Gulf right now other than Francine. Kayla asked, what time will the first bands of the hurricane start for Franklin? One could argue that they've already started, although I think the more significant ones aren't going to begin until tomorrow morning. So we'll be looking at those begin to move in probably around or a little after sunrise tomorrow. Michael says, hey, man, we miss you, dude. First time I've seen you since I believe Laura, if I'm not mistaken. Glad to see you again, unless I've been missing out. You've been missing out. We've been doing it. First, we've been doing this one for the last 3 days, and we've been doing briefings for the last 4 years ever since Laura, you know, as needed. They're not constant, but I've been here and there. So, you know. We always like to have the running joke around here. You don't want to see me because when you see me, bad weather's coming. Or he says, Donald, how long have you been a weather god? I am not a weather god. If I was a weather god, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about a hurricane right now because I would not do such a thing to you. I am a weather man. It's different. That said, I have been a meteorologist for just a little over 15 years now, about 15 and a half years. The vast majority of them here in Lake Charles. Tamika asked, why does it say we still under a tropical storm southwest Jeff Davis? Because you still are under a tropical storm warning. What you have to keep in mind about tropical storm warnings, you don't necessarily have to be where the storm is making landfall to get tropical storm force winds. So you're looking at Jeff Davis here. We are still looking at the tropical storm warning there. That is still in effect. And that is because you see the wind gusts there. We're expecting wind gusts of up to 50 miles per hour tomorrow in Jeff Davis Parish. Tropical storm conditions start at 39. You're going to 50, and therefore you are under a tropical storm warning. It makes sense, doesn't it? That is why. Joey says, Donald, the Weather Channel keeps featuring Franklin and saying there could be 9 feet of water. Do they do that to be dramatic and sensational? Yeah, but also no. They've got to keep you watching. But at the same time, we are forecasting between 5 and 10 feet of storm surge in and around that area. Let me go ahead. So we do have storm surge warnings in effect all around Vermilion Bay, essentially. All of Vermilion, well, coastal portions of Vermilion Parish, St. Martin, Lower St. Martin, St. Mary. You can see our peak storm surge forecast right there. It does call for between 5 and 10 feet around Vermilion Bay, and that would include in and around the Franklin area. So yeah, we are going to be looking at significant storm surge rolling in into that area. So yes, in some respects they are correct, but they certainly like to make a production out of it. I have no doubt about that. But if it works, you know, it's got your attention, doesn't it? Carly says, I'm one of her favorites along with Ben Terry. God rest his soul, Ben Terry. Moment of silence for Ben Terry. I'm dead serious. Ben Terry was a friend of mine. And I do miss him. Nahara asks, how many hours should it last once it lands, and how long will it last as a hurricane once it lands? There's a couple of different ways for me to answer this depending on exactly what you're asking. As far as how long are the tropical storm force winds going to land, this is also relevant depending on exactly where you live too. So essentially, the longest duration wind is going to be in and around the Vermilion Bay area. We're going to be looking at those winds beginning mid-morning tomorrow and continuing probably through mid-evening. So you're looking probably about 12-ish hours or thereabouts of tropical storm force winds. The hurricane force winds are in a much narrower band. You're only looking at probably maybe 10 to 20 miles wide of actual hurricane force winds. So those aren't going to last nearly as long. You're going to looking at maybe an hour or two for the strongest hurricane force winds to actually move through an area. Big Juan asks, is Houston, Texas still in a tropical storm or hurricane watch? No, there are no hurricane or any kind of tropical hazards for the Houston area or the coastline near Houston. Drew asks, how does it feel to be discussing a Category 1 versus the several previous Category 4 and higher storms over the last few years? It's actually difficult because you want to be like, this ain't that big of a deal. It's just a Category 1. But we can't take that philosophy because a Category 1, as we saw with Burl, can still do significant damage, like as Houston can very well attest from earlier this year. So we're absolutely not trying to downplay this at all. We are still looking at significant impacts, even though it's not the absolute devastation that something like a Laura hath wrought, or an Ida, for example. But at the same time, this is going to be devastating for some people. Areas that see those 5 to 10 feet of storm surge, potentially devastating. 100-mile-an-hour winds, 90, 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts, potentially devastating. So this, even though it's not going to be quite as widespread as some of those larger events, this is still going to be a significant event for some people. So we absolutely, in some respects it's different, but in others we're kind of taking the same sense of urgency with it. Alicia says, why do I enjoy watching this more than that debate? Well, I am entertaining, and nobody's yelling at me, so there's that. Cade asks, how does Jim Cantore know exactly where landfall will happen? He knows the same way that we know. He makes a forecast, just like we do. He is a degreed meteorologist, at least I'm pretty sure he is. And he certainly has a whole team of expert meteorologists around him. Those with the Weather Channel, we give them some flack on here for their theatrics at times, but they are degreed meteorologists and they are professionals. So they are just as good at forecasting hurricanes as we or anybody else are. So they look at the computer models, they make their best forecast, and they go for it. And oftentimes they are right. Okay. Let's see. Heather asked, what category do you think she'll be when she makes landfall? Again, we're looking at probably a strong category 1. Can't rule out a low-end category 2, but I think probably strong category 1 is the most likely scenario at this point. Maybe somewhere between 80 and 90 mile an hour. We're already at 85 miles an hour, so we don't have much further to go. So probably maybe right about 90 miles an hour. The thing is, we're only going to be looking at maybe another 8 to 12 hours of potential intensification. And then as the storm approaches the coast, we're going to be looking at some increasing wind shear moving across it. So we may actually see some weakening before it actually makes landfall. It may peak sometime either tonight or very early tomorrow morning, and then may actually lose some strength before it actually moves ashore. That's kind of my expectation, and the Hurricane Center has said something very similar. So I think that's kind of what everybody's leaning towards right now. Big Juan asks, are the plane hunters still around Hurricane Francine? Yeah, they're out there right now. In fact, they just gave us an update a little while ago that actually upgraded the winds to 85 miles an hour. So yes, they are out there taking measurements. Yolanda says, would you say Laura was a Category 5 hurricane? No, Yolanda, Laura was a strong Category 4 hurricane, and we've got loads and loads of data to back that up. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I just saw the clock ticked 1 hour we've been on here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the time being. If you have a question that I missed for some reason, or you think of a question while you're viewing this as a recording, feel free to send us a direct message on Facebook. You can also send me an email. My email address is on the screen, donald.jones@noaa.gov. You can also give us a call here at our office, area code 337-477-5285. And we'll be happy to answer your question that way. Again, direct message on Facebook. You can send us an X on X. You can send us a message on Instagram. So lots of ways to get in touch with us if you do still have any burning questions about the storm or its expected impacts. The parish by parish breakdown will be on our social media pages mucho shortly, just as soon as I get off of here and can get them up there. So they will be there for you to view in their entirety and share as appropriate. Our next briefing will be 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. And by that point, we'll see if Francine has managed to get any stronger. We'll be looking at landfall tomorrow afternoon. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful rest of your night. Get some sleep. We're going to need it, at least for those of you, especially across South Central Louisiana. It's going to be a long day tomorrow. The rest of you, it is 11:30, so you need sleep anyway. So go get some. I'm going to go do so as well. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your night. We'll talk to you again 10:30 a.m. tomorrow morning.